Everyone, welcome to another video on the JayBee
Hello.
and Milly channel. As always, today we are joined by Smash.
Hello.
And Rihanna.
Hi.
Now, as part of the 5-Star Talk interviews, we are really excited today to be able to speak with Chris Connelly.
Hi.
So Chris is absolutely amazing, and there's so many reasons that we are excited to be speaking with them today. Now, we're on a bit of pressure today because they themselves are an award-winning interviewer, having worked for places like MTV, Rolling Stones, and now they're an ESPN reporter as well. So I guess the pressure's on us a little bit today with the interviewing skills. So I guess, JayBee, I'm gonna let you start and the pressure's on you first.
Oh gosh. So I guess my first question would be that you started working at MTV as a host, interviewer, like specializing in movies. And I wanted to ask, what inspired you down this road?
Well, they were nice enough to ask. And so I just sort of said yes. Before that, I was a print journalist. I worked for a magazine called Rolling Stone for a while, a number of years. I started as the receptionist and the switchboard operator at Rolling Stone, and then they made me a writer, and I got to know a little bit more about the movies. And so when MTV decided they wanted to do a movie show, they asked, if we should talk, and we talked for a while, and eventually they asked me to host it. And so that's what I did for the first 4 years or so there. I was still an editor of the magazine, and then I also did this MTV show, and that was a good way for me to talk to a lot of the people who were in movies or making movies then. And one way or another, that's kind of what I've specialized in since, is talking to people in entertainment, who either make it or who think about it or who shape it somehow. And then I also have a job as an ESPN reporter where I talk to people who are involved with or care about sports. And in many cases, people who use sports to deal with a personal challenge or a crisis of some kind. So kind of two different jobs I have, and they both sort of connect sometimes.
That's amazing. I mean, I was gonna say, with that being in movies, and like you say, that's kind of a continuing theme. Do you think it was maybe kind of fueled by an underlying enjoyment of movies? Because you've gone on to do some amazing things like the Celebrating Marvel Stan Lee project and all that kind of thing. So like you say, you've worked with sport and movies. Do you think these are like underlying passions that were lucky enough to kind of feed into the work you were doing?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, I grew up going to a lot of movies and stuff. When I was in high school, I would instead of doing my homework, I'd go and watch movies. You'd go to the movie theater, and I grew up in New York City, so I could just get on a city bus like at 10 o'clock at night, go down and watch a movie and come back. And so movies became a really exciting art form for me. And I think the 70s were a very creative time for movie making. And so, that sort of spurred that. I did a little theater in college and university here in America, and I was really bad. I mean, really bad. So I think it gave me an appreciation for how hard acting is and how challenging that can be. And so I hope I show that appreciation when I interview actors, because I've seen how difficult it was. And now, having done it for a while, I've seen people, from when they were very young, come through and have wonderful careers. And so that's been fun to see. But you're right, it stems from a belief that movies and entertainment in general was exciting and fun to talk about, and let you talk about a lot of other things too. And I think that's still true for me.
And it certainly is a really exciting thing. I mean, I know that JayBee and I, we often kind of counting down the days till a movie's released, going to things like the midnight screenings for certain things, like the Marvel movies at our local cinema all get midnight screening the second they're available. So it is like a really exciting thing and a really nice environment too. So I can see where inspiration had come from that.
Well, I love still seeing, people getting charged up like that. I remember going to the premiere of Avengers out here, and I'd never seen anything like it, at least not for a long, long time. I mean, it was on Hollywood Boulevard. It was right across from, the Grauman's Chinese Theater and across from the Dolby where they have the Oscars. And people were just in a lather. People were just so thrilled. I can still remember when Robert Downey Jr. pulled up in his limo when he got out and waved. People just about fainted, And it was just thrilling to see people that excited about the movies and that excited about a story, not just because of the movie, but because you could see it was a great way for people to become friends and give them something to talk about. You know, they identified with the people up on the screen with their challenges as well as their powers, and it was something they could get excited about in advance. And then you'd see all this group of people like getting together and talking about it afterwards. And I think that's what's great about the movies, is that it creates a community like the one you have that lets people talk about and share what makes the movie special to them.
Yeah, 100%. And it was so interesting that you mentioned people getting excited for stories and kind of getting ready for release of movies. I was watching, I think there was something that resurfaced the other day, and it was for the old like Charlie's Angels movie starring Cameron Diaz. And a lot of that trailer was kind of just the main co-stars dancing in front of like a kind of almost dated like fiery effect now, whereas now we've got, you know, teaser trailer number 1, then actual trailer, then trailer number 2. And so I guess with the marketing of movies having changed over the years, what was it kind of like to like, did that impact how you would interview like movie stars at all?
Well, you certainly would see people get really excited about a particular movie coming out. You know, now we have, ever since really like 2000, and maybe later since I guess since Iron Man, there's this kind of built-in anticipation for what the MCU will do next. And there's a lot of really informed thoughts that I get from all you guys, you know, as you imagine what's going to happen next, and you tell me kind of what you think will be going on, and what about the post-credit sequence and all that stuff. It's, you know, it's all stuff I may not necessarily know nearly as well as you. And so I learn from the fans as much as anybody. And I study those appearances at Comic-Con or anything like that to try to get clues, things that people are interested in, you know. So I'm learning off of fans now as they react to those sort of early teasers or appearances at conventions to get a sense as to what people are going to be charged up about on the next film. In the old days, you know, they were just trying to get you interested. But as you mentioned from Charlie's Angels, like a lot of the other things we see now, was intellectual property, as they say, IP being reimagined for a new audience. I'm old enough to remember the original Charlie's Angels. In fact, as you may notice, I have Farrah's hairstyle right now today. But when Drew and Cameron and Lucy Liu got all the excitement was through the roof for that. And so sometimes you're just kind of surfing on everybody's excitement and trying to play into that as you talk to people about a movie.
It is amazing. Sorry, Rihanna.
Speaking of like the excitement from like seeing a movie, have you been to a premiere or something that afterwards the excitement from the fans just stood out to you more than like any other movie?
You know, I think you know, you know, that second Avengers movie like just about melted people down. It's like by now they had taken over the entire street at Hollywood Boulevard, you know, and now people just flooded in and got talking and were buzzing and back and forth. You know, all those movies just sent people through the roof. The last one that had a kind of premiere like that was Eternals. And the anticipation before Eternals out there on the street, Rihanna, I think I sent you a photo of myself outside, you know, Eternals, because there hadn't been anything like it for so long because of the pandemic. All of these superstars, you know, these huge stars, both of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and just in real life, you know, Salma Hayek and Angelina Jolie and all these people were out there in full force to support things. And the fans had waited so long for a moment like that, where they could all be together and share their fandom, and everybody was in such a good mood. I just had to send you that picture so you would see that the franchise was back in a huge way. And it gives you like a little goose pimples, you know, when you're just out there, you know, you're putting yourself, you know, you're making sure that the little costumes are behind you, or all the, you know, the directors or something. There's Chloe Zhao and all, you know. It can't help but get you fired up about movies to see how excited everybody else is. And I'm glad you sensed that just from the picture. I wish you'd been there, because you would have vibed on it as much as anybody.
Hopefully one day soon, and then we'll be able to be on like the carpet together and celebrate like one of the premieres. Because when you sent me that picture, I remember I showed it to my mum, and we were both like, it looks so cool, and it just made me more excited for the movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's just great when when the tribe gets together. I know we can all talk from a distant way, or maybe you share your thoughts with people on social media and stuff, but when everybody comes out and everybody can like be with each other and say, oh, I saw that, or I noticed that, and that intelligence gets kind of pooled, like whenever, especially there's one of those enigmatic, credit sequences where things are being hinted at. Oh, the buzzes that go on when those things happen. And then everybody shuts up if they're going past anybody who hasn't seen the movie. That's the part I like, when they're leaving and there's a big line of people to see the next screening. Oh my gosh, they're all zipped up until they get to the next place where they can have a slice of pie and really talk about it. So that part I like too.
Honestly, that resonates with me so much because obviously I'm going to stay spoiler free here because I know Rihanna hasn't seen the movie and is dying to. But recently, the new Spider-Man movie came out and we went to that on release day. And it was the best experience I think I've ever had in the cinema. Like there was a screening coming out as we were going in and they all seemed really happy, but like no one was talking about it. Everyone seemed quite quiet. There was like people from the age of 2 to the age of 32 wearing Spider-Man t-shirts, and the amount of just applause in the cinema at different moments, and at the end people just clapping as well, and that was for a cinema screen, and it was a very amazing experience.
Quite rare to see that in the UK though. I know that America, it's so good for movie premieres with like people dressing up and kind of like screaming and shouting, but over in the UK, even when the first Avengers came out, the most you'd get is like a woo when like they're all together. But there was just something so different even in the UK about that Spider-Man like premiere. Everyone was like clapping. It was like being at a concert. It was just such amazing energy, especially after the pandemic and everything, with people coming back into the fold and enjoying stuff again. But I guess
I don't know what I did right, but I got to be in the Dolby. I mean, because they had so many people going to some of these movies that that they had to divvy them up with different theaters. There were some people at the El Capitan, which is across the street from the Dolby. There's some people at the Grauman's Chinese where they put their their handprints in cement, and there's some people at the Dolby themselves. And for whatever reason, I wound up at the Dolby, and they brought every single star from the MCU onto the stage to take their bow, and the place went crazy. But what I think you would have liked as well is how much each of them enjoyed being with one another, just to see the hugs and the high fives and the enthusiasm that these wonderful actors had to be with each other, not knowing if they would ever have a moment like this ever again. Really, I think made people there feel like that fandom you're talking about was worthwhile and shared by the people who'd made the movies. And I think that means a lot to people.
One thing that I'm really finding with movies at the minute is it's not just that the fans are loving it, but I feel like the fans are also getting a lot of love back from the filmmakers. Like there's lots of nostalgic things happening in movies at the minute, like the new Ghostbusters movie and seeing the originals there again. The new Scream movie, you see some original references return and characters and things. And a new movie that will be coming out soon, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, there's been lots of hints that there'll be some really nice fan kind of gestures in that as well. And I feel like it's
and in
just
Jurassic World as well.
Yeah.
That trailer.
Oh yeah.
And again, like I know that a lot of these movies mean a lot to Rihanna, and I know she tries to say spoiler free as possible, so I really don't want to kind of add further to that, but I do think that we're starting to see so much from the studios trying to kind of match the love that the fans really do have for all these things.
I think you're right. I think that's astute to notice. Sometimes it's called fan service, and I think fan service has become a bigger and bigger part of some of these franchises in the last few years. I think of it as sort of beginning with the epilogue to that last Harry Potter book, which was sort of a pure fan service moment, what they are when they've grown up and all the rest of it. But I can still remember I had been at MTV for like 12 years and I thought I knew everything or whatever. And I went to the very first press conference for the very first Spider-Man. And it was on the Sony lot, and on stage, we hadn't seen the movie yet. On stage, there was Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst, Oscar nominee, and Sam Raimi, the esteemed director, and I think Laura Ziskin, the producer. And we were all asking our usual questions and, you know, our savvy little movie questions. And then somebody from the back raised their hand and said, "Will she have red hair?" And they went, "Well, I guess she will. Yeah, she'll have red hair in the movie." And we asked our usual questions. And then someone else from the back said, "Will she say, 'Go get him, Tiger'?" And they said, "Well, yeah, you know, well, I guess she will. She'll say, 'Go get him, Tiger.'" And I kind of laughed. Oh, you know, boy, people. And what I like to say is now, I work for that guy now. I work for the guy who said, "Go get him, Tiger." I work for those people. That's Comic-Con Nation. And we didn't realize in 2000, when they made that first Spider-Man movie, that the world was about to change, and that people like yourselves who love these stories and who these stories mean so much to, you were going to be in charge. You were going to be telling us what the movies were going to be like and who the movies were going to be about and who they were going to be made for. All before that, as good as those movies were, Spider-Man, Batman, Superman, they weren't made for the fans of those characters. They were made for movie fans. Some of them were wonderful movies, but they weren't made with fans first in mind. And the thing about the MCU, and they're the first to tell you this, Jon Favreau, when he made when he made Iron Man with Kevin Feige, we're going to make these for fans first. And the four of you are proof that they made the right decision.
I mean, it is just so good to see that that's the way things are going. But because we've spoken about all the fanfare that can be kind of brought up with movie premieres and the fact that that's like finally happening again, obviously within the pandemic, the whole streaming service did take a kind of front seat to all of this, with, you know, Disney Plus having premiere access and things like that. Do you ever see that overtaking the role of movie premieres in like however many years it takes, or do you always see the kind of face-to-face interactions being at the forefront?
I think there are a lot of movies that we won't see in theaters anymore. A lot of kinds of movies that we probably won't, where we'll see them on the couch, you know, we'll see them at home. I think that genie is not going back into the bottle. But there is a whole group of movies that you want to share with your friends. And I think they're the movies that are the most special to the four of you, and the movies that are most special to the people who are listening to our voices now. And those are big, exciting movies, or scary movies, or movies that you really want to be in a room to share with people. And so as much fun as it was to watch, you know, Black Widow at home, to see it in a theater was really exciting. As great as Shang-Chi was at home, to see it with a group of people who felt like they were seeing themselves on screen for the first time in heroic roles was really a thrill. And you could feel it, because you were there. So there are just a lot of experiences I think we're all going to still want to share with other folks. And I think the movies that are most special to the four of you are the movies that we're likely to continue to see, having these big premieres, getting stars out, sharing the love, feeling the love. You know, it's still a special thing.
I think, JayBee Milly and I have talked about, just because this is kind of how we met, but it was through like the Jurassic Park and Jurassic World franchise. But, you know, that movie was slated to come out originally last year, and it got pushed a year forward now to come out in theaters again. I think that's kind of an example of like, you know, it's going to be that's one of those big movies that's, you know, everybody wants to be together, see it on the big screen, you know, and so there's going to be these big experiences that you gotta see it together on this, you know, the biggest screen possible.
And, you know, all the schedules have gotten all like, you know, messed up.
Oh, yeah.
With the pandemic, obviously. I mean, you know, we still haven't seen, you know, Top Gun Maverick. Like been supposed, I mean, I think I was still in high school when they made that movie. And now eventually I think will come out, but it keeps getting postponed. And a lot, you know, you know how long they hung on to Black Widow and things like that. And it must be super frustrating, you know, to have a movie that's ready to go that just kind of sits on the shelf and you go, let's get the dust off of this one and see what they think. But now it seems like they've got their mojo. We're in, you know, phase 4 now, and we'll see how that all works out.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting. You know, what we've seen obviously is Marvel Marvel kind of moving beyond the whole idea of the superhero movie and declaring we can make any kind of movie you like that just happens to have superheroes in it. Superhero is not a genre. Superhero is a medium. You know, we can do, you know, slapstick comedy. We can do, you know, satire. We can do a rom-com. We can do any type of movie. It just happens to have people in, you know, who are superheroes in it. That's very daring. You know, that's a really daring approach. Meanwhile, over on the DC side, it feels like, whereas, I mean, I know you guys, I'm sure, have thought about this and forgotten more about this than I do. So tell me to shut up if I'm getting it wrong. But it feels like on the DC side, it's the exact opposite. Whereas over on MCU, you've got Kevin Feige really like, you know, planning it all out, making sure everything works together, making sure things complement each other, trying out different forms. You've got Hawkeye, the Christmas comedy, and WandaVision, the genre-bending TV show, and then, you know, these different combinations of things going on, using independent directors to do these big things. And then over on, but always like with a central focus. And then over at DC, I feel like they take characters and they throw the keys to interesting directors. You know, they throw the keys to James Gunn and say, go make your Suicide Squad movie. They throw the keys to, you know, Todd Phillips and say, go make Joker. You know, let's see what happens. Two different approaches. We get two different types of superhero movies as a result. Didn't James Gunn have some sort of Scooby-Doo connection? I'm trying to remember. Didn't I see him turn up?
The screenplay writer for the first.
Yeah, he wrote the screenplay for the original movie.
Yeah.
You know. So I was going to the set of I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, which I'm sure is a movie that none of you has seen.
Actually, I know
It was the first
about
one
it.
recently.
You know
Haven't
about it.
seen
Okay,
it.
I'll take that. Know about it. It's fine.
I know about it. Thanks to my
Okay.
boy.
Well, you know, I know you'll want to write this down. I Still Know What You Did Last Summer was a sequel to I Know What You Did Last Summer with many of the same cast. Jennifer Love Hewitt, Brandy, the singer-actress, and to the point, Freddie Prinze Jr., you know, who reprised his role from the first film. So they were shooting down in Mexico. And I was going down for MTV to cover something, and I wound up sitting behind Freddie Prinze Jr. and his friend on the plane.
Oh, wow.
And so I thought, well, what is Mr. Big Movie Star, you know, up and coming, exciting movie star going to do on the flight there? You know, what am I going to learn about the exciting lifestyle of young Hollywood? Because even then I was young, even then I was over the hill. So Freddie and his friend, they take out a pack of playing cards. And I think, oh, I know what's going to happen now. A little heavy betting, a little, you know, a little Las Vegas in the front row there. Good luck. And they started to play. They started to play Go Fish. They were playing like the most adorable children's card game. It was the most wholesome thing I've ever seen from young Hollywood. So certainly fitting that Freddie and Sarah Michelle Gellar would wind up in the Scooby-Doo movie. They were perfect for it.
I think we all agree with like the casting. And I think this is one thing that I feel like in the majority of movies and even TV shows, they seem to get the casting spot on, where you can actually envision the actual actress or actor as the character outside of like the movies and stuff. And one thing that, you know, every single time you've got an interview coming up and like I know about it, I'll watch it as soon as I can. And you listed off all the people who work on the movies that are integral to it, but I feel like people like you who interview the actors and actresses and basically interview anyone, you help bring the movie alive in itself, because I feel like, especially how you go about interviewing, it allows us to get to know the actors and actresses, and they feel comfortable enough to be themselves in a lot of ways. And I think that's a real like spark to like how you work, because without people like you doing the interviews, we wouldn't know about these actors and actresses, and we wouldn't really know about what they had like coming up or what it was like working on the movies. So I just wanted to say a big thank you to you and anyone else who does interviews and stuff, because it really does help us as movie fans enjoy the movie twice as much.
Well, you're very nice to say that, and that means a lot coming from you, Rihanna, because I know you've been interviewed, and so you know what it's like to be on the other side, and you know, and you also, you know, you don't want spoilers, you know, so a lot of times, you know, you're sitting with the entire cast of a movie, and you can't talk about what happens in the movie. It's like, because, you know, in my day, like when I was younger, like probably you could have talked about what happens in the first 2/3 of a movie and fans wouldn't mind. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think people don't want to know. I don't think people want to know anything that happens after the first 10 minutes of a movie. And so so I go into I've gone into rooms and like, there's Robert Downey Jr. and there's Scarlett Johansson and there's Jeremy Renner, you know, and there are like 2 or 3 other people, Sam Jackson, and like, I'm thinking, what can we talk about? It's like, that won't spoil it for fans. So, you know, we talk about how they're friends or how they tease each other or what they're like. So you can get a sense of their camaraderie or what it was like to be directed or stuff. Everything but what actually happened, you know, or how they feel about their particular characters, because that's usually okay. But as soon as I start saying what happens in the movie, I have to go, shh, you know, because even though I feel like I need to see the movie, I need to know everything that happens so I don't say anything that's wrong when I, you know, talk to people or tell the story. I don't want to spoil for anybody, you know, and you know, I think the joke is in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that the one guy you've really got to look out for is Tom Holland. Tom Holland will tell you the whole darn story.
Yeah.
So Tom Holland needs to have a minder at all times, so that like, you know, so that always, you know, they had like a whole gag going like before, you know, along the way when they were all in Atlanta. I didn't do this interview, I read it. So what happens in the next movie? Everybody dies. Yep, everybody dies. He just kept saying everybody dies because they taught Tom Holland he dies just because that would get him from saying something that actually was true was going to happen. Oh, everybody dies. Oh my God, oh my God. So you just never know. So what movies are you looking forward to now? Like what there's so much content that comes out now. You know, there's so much on streaming and stuff and in theaters, and then eventually what has you most excited that's coming out soon?
Ooh. See, Smash did a video about this a couple of days ago, didn't you? The movies that you were looking forward to.
Uh-huh.
So there's the new Jurassic World one, which like I was saying is looking amazing. And I think, like you were saying as well, Marvel is just always doing something that you want to like look out for and latch onto. So I remember seeing Spider-Man and being like, I don't know where Marvel can go from here. There's like literally, surely they can't take a step up from that. And then they start teasing the Doctor Strange things. And they're like, okay, well, this is what we're going to be doing. And this is how it breaks this record. And it's like, okay, that's the step up then. Okay, you managed it. And it's just almost like, I'm almost more curious than ever about Marvel because I'm like, I don't know how you're going to do one after that. Like with Endgame, it was kind of, I don't know how the plot continues from here. And then the last movie, it was so good and so fan motivated that it was like, how do you top that? And they just keep progressing. And so it really is just really exciting to watch out for them.
I think you've seen both franchises. I mean, both the MCU and DC sort of trying to come up with trying to find stories and new characters to sort of take the heat off of, you know, the ones that we've all known and loved for a long time, you know, and having some success with that, you know, that's certainly an aim, is like, what more can you do on that front? Who else can you bring? And it's like those little cars in the circus where like 100 clowns get out. It's like, it just seems like when it comes to the MCU, there are all these characters I've never heard of. We're just, you know, running all over the place and doing things. And smart people like you were telling me, oh yeah, well, what you don't know about him is that he's like the best shooter in the world and all, you know. And I'm like writing it down and trying to remember it all. So it's key. You know, you try to keep up. It can be hard.
I mean, there's definitely some obscure characters that they're even introducing now. Like, one of my weirdest movie memories as a child was when my mum, I think it was by accident, but she bought me the Howard the Duck movie when I was like 6 years old. And
Sure.
there's some weird stuff in that, but just like thinking about how that
Oh my
now
gosh, is there ever? Yeah, wow.
is a character that's in the kind of Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and obviously with like multiverse stuff, like even something like that original Howard the Duck movie could be considered, you know, canon to an extent with like what Marvel's doing now. But it's just so interesting to look at the kind of first Marvel movie that was made, which is Howard the Duck, and then how it's kind of evolved.
I don't think anyone in Marvel thinks that Howard the Duck is the first Marvel movie ever made, just because you know Howard the Duck is famous in Hollywood for being one of the biggest flops of all time. Like, you know, like there are all these headlines like Duck Cooks, Price is Goose. Frank Price was the guy at Columbia who greenlit that movie, you know. So it just didn't work out for whatever reason. There wasn't anybody who wanted to make a bad movie. They just didn't bring it home. I, meanwhile, used to tell my children, my kids, that my favorite DC superhero was Elongated Man, who you've probably never heard of, who was the dorkiest superhero of all time. His only like superpower was that he could, like, you know, make his arms and legs really long. And so they called him, I mean, let's face it, the name of his character just flies off the tongue, Elongated Man. And it's like, when were they going to make an elongated man? Look, he can ski over a tree, okay? Because his legs get really, I mean, how about that? Like, he can ski over a tree. Like, maybe he can't save like the universe, but he can ski over a tree. And they would just like shake their heads. And then I would tell them that, like, you know that, what's the Marvel movie where like the final big scene ends like right in front of Grand Central Station in New York? I would go, I grew up like a few blocks away from there. And they would go, just stop talking, okay? So we can watch the movie.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. And I think it's something else that I think we all have perhaps a shared love for. And I know it's something that you then, after movies, kind of started to get more into in regards to writing and interviewing, is music. How did that kind of transition happen?
Well, music was, you know, music really kind of, in my youth, music kind of defined youth culture. You know, like music was the purest expression of youth culture. It was the thing that divided young people from old people. It's the kind of music they like. You know, in some ways you could say this, you know, these sort of movies are that same kind of thing. It's like, this is really stuff that's everybody loves them. This is really stuff identified with young people, and it's something that young people really particularly like. And it's always exciting to write about or talk about youth culture, because young people are like going to decide what we're all into and what we're all excited about like 5 years from now. You're the leading edge of stuff, and we can learn a lot from the things that you're into. And so, you know, music was a great way to kind of get started with that, because it was the purest expression of youth culture. And I happened to be growing up at a time when I thought there was a lot of really exciting music, and you could talk to people and all the rest of it, you know. Now, interviewing, you know, musicians and interviewing actors is a very different thing. Actors are used to the English language and used to, you know, speaking about themselves in terms of the English language. Musicians, not always so much. Musicians sit in a room and think up a song, and then when you hear it, you know, it's not that different from the song they came up with. You know, it's like Taylor Swift or whoever, like Rihanna, thinks up, you know, what, you know, they come up with a song and it's recorded, and it's not that different. Movies pass through so many different hands and change so many times. There's so many different versions of a screenplay. Things change over time. Everything kind of changes. So it's not the same thing. There's a big distance between that original idea and the movie that gets made. Maybe that makes for better art. Maybe that makes for worse art. But what I love about telling the story is that there's so many different people with different perspectives. Oh, I wrote this, so this was my idea, or I wrote like that, or this was my idea. You know, when you talk about something like Eternals, and I'm sure it's true for some of the other Marvel movies too, Kevin Feige would take pitches from directors. How do you think this story should be told? There are lots of different paths to that final product. And sometimes finding out what those are and how they changed and how they had to be fixed can be very interesting.
That's really interesting, because we recently got to speak to some people, and like one of them was Craig Titley, and he mentioned about how he wrote, like he had an original like draft of the Scooby-Doo movie back in 1996, was it? And it's quite interesting because he told us the story, because it then went on to James Gunn's adaptation, but he still got writing credits because things were included from his original draft into this new one. And it was really interesting how one small idea can be turned into something even bigger, and it can get different things. And then when you add in everyone's perspective who worked on it, it just creates another story aside from the main story of the movie.
And that's what's fascinating to me about movie making is, and the creation of culture that way, Rihanna, is that everybody contributes, and the idea is that the best idea wins, you know, but that final product has so many different items of input that you don't really know how it got there. I never watched Scooby-Doo as a child, but maybe the last kids TV show I ever watched as a kid was the Archie show. And you who are familiar with the history of Scooby-Doo will, when I say, you know, the Archie show walked so that Scooby-Doo could run. You know, Archie was sort of the initial idea of what they wanted Scooby-Doo to be. You know, it was a story about like, you know, 4 or 5 people and a dog, and there was pop music involved, and they were going to solve things. I think the original idea for Scooby-Doo was that they were going to have a hit song in each episode, right? Because Archie had done that, you know, and the same, you know, sort of executives sort of supervised it and wanted it to be more like the Archie show every now and then. Because the Archie show had a #1 hit. Archie show, like, you know, yielded Sugar Sugar, which was a huge hit here in America for the summer of 1969. Scooby-Doo went a different direction, obviously, but that influence was, you know, was very much there. In fact, the Archies, which was the sort of fake band that came out of the Archie show, their last single was called Feelin' So Good Scooby-Doo. Scooby with a K. So I always feel like that was a hint as to what was going to happen next with Scooby-Doo.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and I think even the creators of Scooby they claimed that song had nothing to do with it, and that it was all that Strangers in the Night song, which they make reference to quite a lot, and even in that initial script we read. But it's just so interesting to find out where all these ideas came from, and almost how different our world would be if, you know, a creator didn't hear a certain song on a certain moment. And I think going to that kind of core theme of music, I think that it's tremendously important in society that, you know, just hearing a song on a certain occasion could lead to a whole other world of things.
Yeah, and you had, you know, with Scooby-Doo, you had like 2 people, and you had people involved who had a lot of history in music. You know, you obviously had the name Scooby-Doo, which, as you say, was based on that Sinatra line. You know, there was a famous kind of, you know, item of graffiti from back in the day that said, "To be is to do," Socrates. You know, to do is to be, Nietzsche. Doobie doobie doo, Sinatra. And that's how we wound up with, you know, with Scooby-Doo. And then here in America, at least, Casey Kasem, who voiced, you know, Shaggy, was this huge radio DJ who had this show American Top 40. And so that was nationally syndicated. And so a lot of people would hear about like the big hits in the nation and stuff from hearing Casey Kasem talk about that. Music is always like the first way in to culture, because music is immediately accessible. It's very specific. And in particular, it's a way for young people to claim something that old people don't have. And so when you start talking about music, that's how you get the chops to start talking about things like television and movies and things like that. At least that's how it worked for me.
Speaking of like music and stuff and how integral it is to everyone's like life, do you have any memories from like a concert that you went to that made you even more excited to work with like the Rolling Stones and things like that, because then you can talk about things that you enjoyed and the music that you liked?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I've been lucky to see a lot of, you know, a lot of bands that I've really enjoyed over the years, just because that was kind of my job for a while. You know, like you were supposed to go up and, you know, that was a pretty good job to have at like 24 or 25. Yeah, you got to go out every night and see every band ever. Like, that's the thing we want you to do. It's just like, go out and see music. So, you know, the things that were special to me will, you know, will be familiar to anybody, you know, who looks like me. Like, I got to, you know, I remember going over to Germany to hang out with U2 for like a week while they played a festival there. And then I went back to Ireland with them and kind of, you know, hung out around, you know, around Dublin with them and stuff like that. So that was a lot of fun. You know, you sort of would do whoever the star of the moment was. I did a big thing with Madonna. I went to a club with Madonna and stayed out all night, and then interviewed her a few days later when I had gotten my bearings back. And that was, you know, she was always great and always had interesting things to say, you know. You know, if they made music in the 80s or 90s, at least, chances are I you know, I got a little, but I also had a great time talking to Katy Perry, who grew up not far from here and had an interesting background. I did Britney once upon a time in Hawaii when she told me she was going to sneak past her bodyguard and read a book on the beach. So, you know, you're grateful for the opportunities you get to talk to these people, and then to see them live, you know, is a lot. I actually saw Destiny's Child perform a number of times, and then wound up co-hosting a couple of shows with Beyonce. I'm pleased to say I don't think you can find any of those things on YouTube. I mean, because it was before Beyonce became like Beyonce, as you might imagine. And my job was to not step on her dress, which I only did once. And I'm just going to say never again.
Well, that just sounds like some absolutely amazing experiences. And I suppose on that, were there any, you know, artists or musicians in your life that have influenced you in particular that you wish that you could have interviewed, or that you have interviewed, that stick out to you as being some of your favorites?
Yeah, you're just always grateful for the chance to get them. And I guess the great thing about working at Rolling Stone and working at MTV is you got them on the way up. You know, you got them before like everything happened to them. I interviewed Tom Cruise when he was 21 years old. You know, he just could not have been younger and sort of more kind of open to the world. And you just had the opportunity, before all the big success happened, you had the opportunity to learn so much more about what his life had been like, how much he had to go through to get to that point, than you would ever sort of know again, you know. And also people would kind of remember that, you know, and you know, and you'd get to call on that again when you would go back and interview somebody later. So getting people early in their career was always really a treat for me. And some cases we were the same age, you know, then they became younger, you know, but seeing them very early on. What, Kirsten Dunst now is an Oscar nominee. I interviewed her when she was 12 years old in Interview with the Vampire with you know, with Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise. And so to see her, I can remember her walking into the room with her mother, you know, and now she's, you know, now she's a parent on her own and has an Oscar nomination. So that's really thrilling. Christina Ricci, I was the first person to ever interview her. She was 8 or 9 on the set of a movie called Mermaids, which she did with Cher and Winona Ryder. And now look at all the great stuff that she's done. So it's fun to root for these people when you see them at a really early age, and then they go on to do great things. I like to think I'm good luck charm for all these young performers. And so now I give you all of my good luck. And I assume that at some point, because we've had this conversation, your publicists will block me from asking you a question. You know, like 5 or 10 years from now. Hey, Rihanna, hi, remember, you know, sorry, she's got to get inside. The show's about to start. Something like that. That way I know I know you'll have made.
I'll be inviting you backstage. Like,
you know,
I don't think any of us can forget about you.
I'm just gonna say, I'm not gonna hold it to you. You know, every now and then, you know, do you guys ever watch Stranger Things? Is that a thing?
Yeah.
So I go back a long way with Winona Ryder. I you know, I did a lot of things, and so I hadn't seen her in a long time, but I was on the red carpet of the SAG Awards. And I waved to her, and she ran over and said, "Remember when you were on the set of Reality Bites?" And I'm like, "Do I remember? Are you kidding? I can't remember that you remember." You know, so So it's fun when people kind of can shout you out and you have a little history. Because I've been lucky enough to be in some unusual places and talk to people before they were like massive. I had an MTV show once where a young woman brought a t-shirt in a pizza box onto the set for me to wear. T-shirt, and I'm from, it's like, I think I just saw your movie. Now, who are you? I said, and she said, my name's Julia Roberts.
Oh, wow.
And
Wow.
look what happened.
Certainly good luck.
I guess moving on to another section that we've got here is that you made the transition into the kind of sporting element, the sporting arena of things, for which you won quite a few awards. I think they were the Sport Emmys. What was it like to kind of win these?
Well, how everybody gets up there and they hold the Emmy and they go, wow, this is much heavier than I thought. And they're right. It is heavier than you think it is, and then you're looking out on all those people and, you have 30 seconds to say thank you. And all you really want to do is just say thank you over and over again. But the wonderful thing, the reason why people like those stories is that the people we talked to had amazingly powerful stories, and Rihanna, you're very much one of those people. It's like, we were grateful that the sports audience had a great capacity for empathy for people who had gone through great challenges and come out on the other side, never lost their will to keep going, never let their setbacks stop them. I think if you watch a lot of sports, that's a quality you really admire. And so whenever we talk to someone who had been through a big challenge and who could tell you about what that challenge was like and how sports had influenced them or helped them, or like somebody in sports had inspired them, that was something our audience really loved. And so, you just want to tell somebody's story. You want to hear somebody's story and tell it. And the willingness of people like Rihanna to share their stories, with us, enabled millions of people watching to feel like, they knew that person and they cared about that person and they wanted that person to succeed. And so seeing some of the great things happen to people, that was a great thing. So I was grateful to be able to tell those stories. I think one of the difference about sports that makes it different from movies or entertainment is there's always a lot at stake. Like if Robert Downey Jr. doesn't have a successful movie, it's like, he's going to be all right. I'm just going to, it's like but like if you lose a game, you could really like be in trouble. Like you might never do anything again, and that quality sort of extends throughout sports. It's like you win or you lose. It's exhilaration or it's not. There's no such thing as a critically loss in sports. And so that means people invest their caring more in a lot of ways. And so stories where about people you want to care about become stories that people care about. And I'm grateful for the chance to tell.
It really is amazing, the work that the people that are so inspiring behind the stories. Of course, they're incredible, but also the people who support, like you're saying, the sports stars that offer their time and the support for these people, they also are so incredible. I know through speaking with people that, as you were saying, the sports thing, they have to work so hard, because if they do have one loss, then that's instantly their kind of reputation diminished, and they're looking at different levels of things. Like if they were looking, say, I know for I know Rihanna, you really enjoy WWE, say it's a fight, if they're looking at, if they win this fight, they can maybe fight somebody else. If they lose, then they're demoted and have maybe just gone back 2 years and have to work their way up again. So I imagine, the hard work that goes into that. It's almost unimaginable to have to kind of think that if you train towards something, if you let that go, you are taking steps back and have to rebuild yourself up again.
And there's a real bond, I think, between athletes and young people who have had physical challenges, because these down on and their bodies can let them down sometimes. you know, they hurt their knee, they hurt a muscle, they have a concussion. I mean, a lot of things can happen that can really change your life. And so there's a real bond, I think, that develops, a bond that I don't necessarily like experience, but that I see, and I can see how powerful it is, you know, between young people who have had challenges with their bodies and some of these elite athletes who have those same challenges. There's like an unspoken connection you can see. And I really respect it when I see it. You know, because they share a knowledge that people like me don't. And it's a special thing.
The entire process of the Wish Week, and like you say, these connections that can be made and the level of understanding that they can have, the entire Wish Week process and everything behind it, it's such an incredible, you know, thing to happen. How is it that
I'm just sorry about the lying? I just feel bad about the lying. That's all. I just feel bad about the lying. Rihanna and I have had a wonderful time talking, and it's like, you know, it's like she's really been great about the fact that I lied my you-know-what off when I sat across from her the first time. I'm so glad I can talk about this in public. You're really helping me. I lied because I didn't want her to know why I was there. We had a big surprise for her, okay? We had a big surprise, and we didn't want to spoil the surprise, you know, like a spoiler or something. But it meant I had to lie. I had to say I wasn't from MTV. I didn't have a special wish for her. I didn't know all these things were going to happen. No, what did I say, Rihanna? I was from the hospital?
Yeah. You were a reporter from Newcastle Hospital, and then Jen was the chief brain surgeon, which definitely
Jen, our producer, the chief brain. We're two Americans. Rihanna was crazy. It's like, you know, what kind of nonsense are they pulling on me? But she was great about it. Oh, sure, yeah. This guy looks like a surgeon, or this guy I wouldn't want this guy in my hospital. I was lying. You know, acting is lying somehow, right? No, I was just lying. And I know maybe it was for a good cause, but I felt bad about it. It's like, you're a special person and wonderful things were going to happen. But there I was saying, oh, yeah, the hospital. Oh, yeah, what are we going to do? Oh, yeah, we're just, you know, shooting us for the hospital. And then finally, you know, and I don't think Rihanna got to find out until I was halfway around the world again. So I thank gosh she had such a wonderful Wish Week, and that everybody had such a wonderful time meeting her, and they found her so inspiring. And I can still see that the time they spent with her means a lot to them. I'm so thrilled that that all happened, because it makes me feel better about the whole, you know.
I mean, if it helps, like there was a moment when we were talking, and you mentioned about how I made a little like poster diagram thing of like what I would kind of like for my Make-A-Wish, and you mentioned that, and I was like, is he actually from Newcastle? Because I don't remember ever mentioning, and my mum had to cover afterwards. I was like, oh yeah, no, I spoke to, you know, Dr. Michaelis before about it, and she must have let them know. And it was like, okay, something special.
So as you can see, it's even worse. I'm a bad liar. So I can't even keep my stories straight, you know. The good thing about interviewing is that usually you can tell the truth. You know, because I always insist on seeing a movie before you know, a lot of times I see people try to get through an interview with not having seen the movie, you know, but I always say I can't interview these people if I haven't seen the movie, because they're not happy if you don't see the movie. It's like, you know, they want you to have appreciated their work. So, you know, that at least keeps me from having to not be straightforward with all these actors I talk to. You know, it's like, yeah, Robert Downey Jr., I saw your movie, you know, because I go back with him like to the 80s. You know, I like, he was in a movie called 1969 that you know, I interviewed him for. He was so funny and so sharp, and obviously so much was going to happen to him, good and bad, before Iron Man came along. But you could just see how intelligent he was and how funny he could be. And if they ever got that on screen, that would be great. And so he's just one of those guys who, you know, got the opportunity to show what he could do because of these movies that we're talking about.
They are amazing. And I guess you talked a bit there about being the interviewer. I guess, how does it feel to be the interviewee on the flip side of things?
Well, it's up to you. It's like, you know, it's like when I leave, you'll all get to settle that among yourselves. Rihanna will go, well, he wasn't that good, was he? You just, I don't know. Did you get anything out of him? I don't know. I can't tell. You know, all those things that people say when they're driving away. It's like, wow, he was a hard nut to crack, wasn't he? I don't know what to say. No, that's all. That's for you to kind of settle. You know, the one pact we interviewers always have is summed up in a single sentence: "It wasn't my fault." I mean,
Oh god.
if the interview didn't go well, it wasn't my fault. It must have been their fault. It must have been the subject's fault. Oh no, it wasn't anything I didn't. Oh, it was just they just didn't feel like talking. So that's the bond that we all share as interviewers. You know, if it was a good interview, I was amazing. If it was a bad interview, they were terrible.
See, where JayBee and I worked, we had to interview some students to kind of collect feedback for work, and they had to come on a podcast to speak about it. And I don't know if it was just a thing with students, but they insisted on giving one-word answers. And you could ask them a question that had 3 different parts to let them elaborate on, and they were just like, oh yeah, it was okay. It's like, oh come on.
No,
and then we gave the video to our boss because they wanted to like upload it for feedback, and we were like, we tried. When you see this,
that's
the
thing
we
Rihanna
tried.
doesn't know is how grateful I was that she had so many interesting things to say and could talk so readily about her situation and everything. That was a blessing, because I've been on the receiving end of one-word answers, and it's because you're talking to 5 or 6-year-old kids. You know, sometimes you get a couple of one-word answers, and that's all right. And then the young person will look at you and go, "You're boring."
Oh gosh. Oh no.
That's awful.
You're the opposite of boring.
You know, they're right. They're probably right. They're not wrong about that. You know, I got to try to be more interesting. So, you know.
You're one of the most interesting people that I've met. And, I'm really grateful that I've got you as a friend, because outside of all this, when we speak, it always makes me smile, and you have so many amazing stories, and I don't find you boring at all. In fact, I could probably, just doing this, I could happily, just talk to you for hours, because I feel like we'd still have something to talk about, and you're just entertaining.
Well, I'm very grateful that you feel that way, and I'm grateful for all the time that we get to talk also, whatever we're talking about. I did all this studying up on Scooby-Doo just in case I had to really know my facts before we came here. Just in case you were going to quiz me on interesting, unimportant Scooby trivia that I might be, I might be way behind. I was going to say things like, so I hear Ming-Na Wen is doing one of the voices for the next Scooby movie, just to kind of show I was up to speed on all of it and stuff. I went to a college called Amherst College, and we all thought at Amherst College, we're one of the 5 college, we had 5 colleges and all, and we always thought that Scooby-Doo had been based on the 5 colleges, and that each character represented a different college. We thought Fred was from Amherst, and Velma was from Mount Holyoke, and what's her name was from Smith, and Scooby himself was from UMass, and Daphne was from Smith, and that Shaggy was from Hampshire. And I will not say which rock star, but I did once sit in the kitchen of a well-known rock star, and I looked at his stove, and on the stove, he had an image of Shaggy. There was Shaggy right on this rock. There wasn't any other art on the stove. It was just Shaggy right there on the rock star's stove there in West Hollywood. So, he's everywhere, essentially.
So I mean, we kind of asked you being on the opposite end, being interviewed and whatever, but going back, has there been a really memorable interview that you've done?
I used to do really strange interviews and memorable ones with Jim Carrey. When he was really doing Me, Myself, and Irene and The Mask and all those big hits, because every time we'd interview, he wanted to do something special, not just because it was the MTV audience. He wanted to really do something special. So I remember going to the set of Ace Ventura 2, When Nature Calls, which was in the state of South Carolina on an abandoned Navy base. And there was a huge soundstage that was filled with nothing but wild animals. You know, just nothing but wild animals there in South Carolina. And so we were actually interviewing him about the Batman movie he was in. And so while he was making this other movie. And so I remember sitting in a you know, in a little like area all lit, ready for him to come. And it was right around sundown. And so we're all set up and it's all quiet. And then the sun went down and those animals started howling. They just started howling. All of them started howling. Like it's like, this is really something. And then, you know, and then Jim would come on and Jim would be just so funny and so off the wall and would do the craziest things. Once I interviewed him on a bus in Los Angeles and it stopped in front of that theater I was telling you about, that Grauman's Chinese Theater, where you put the handprints, because you know who's always in front of Grauman's Chinese Theater are celebrity impersonators. Like if you walk by there and you want to have your picture taken with Spider-Man or your picture taken with Jack Sparrow, there's a guy dressed up as Jack Sparrow. So I'm interviewing Jim Carrey on a Los Angeles city bus. He leaves the bus and pulls somebody up onto the bus, and it's a Michael Jackson impersonator. And he wants me to interview him. Just like crazy stuff like that would happen. I interviewed him once for Me, Myself, and Irene. We had set up this whole like set that looked like a New England, you know, country house. He destroyed it. He destroyed it on camera while I was interviewing him. It was so funny. I can't begin to tell you how funny it was. So I think when people think of my interviews, they think of that one, and they think of the time I interviewed the singer Sia, who you might be familiar with, who did, you know, Chandelier and you know, and Cheap Thrills and stuff. I don't know that she's like this all the time now, but she didn't want her face to be well known back then because she'd been famous and it hadn't worked out, you know. And so she'd kept her face out of the public eye, even though Chandelier was the #1 song in the country. In fact, that day, she had gone to a store in Los Angeles to buy a garden hose. Chandelier was playing on the loudspeaker at the store, and she wasn't recognized when she bought it. So that's all prelude to the fact that when I sat down to interview her, it was just like any other interview, except this was me and this was her. Like that. I interviewed the back of her head. I talked to the back of her head for half an hour. Just because she didn't want, you know, she didn't like, we didn't blur her face. She just turned around and I talked to the back of her head. And she was great. She was great, but like people would go, "You talked to the back of her head?" I said, "I've talked to a lot of bass players. The back of her head was pretty expressive by comparison."
Fair enough. Fair enough.
So, you know, you just want people to be comfortable, whatever you're doing. You know, your job is to kind of, you know, your job is to make them feel like you know what's going on and you know about them. And you want them to be comfortable with when you're talking to them.
So have there been any that you felt nervous for?
I get nervous before everyone, probably. I'm sure I got nervous before Rihanna. It's like you know, it's like how do you feel before you do one of these? You get a little performance energy buzz, right?
Yeah.
It's not nerves so much. It's like, you know, I just want to do a good job. You know, I want to do a good job. I just did the cast of there was a sitcom here that was very successful 30 years ago called Martin. And so I just did a retrospective with them. And you know, I've done this a long time, as you all know. I'm pacing back and forth and looking over my notes and making sure I'm asking the right things and will I get it right and who's, you know, who was on that show and what, you know. You know that your reputation is up for grabs every time you do something. So you want to make a good account of it and you want to show the subject that they mattered. And that you did your homework and that you're up to speed on what it is that their career has been about. So, you know, so that's what you're doing. And then I sit down with the cast of Martin and I go, hey, you know, Tisha Campbell, I remember you performed at the UN when you were in high school. You know, I was in New York then. That was an exciting time, wasn't it? And then you're off and running.
I think that's quite like key because I think that there's been multiple interviewers who have always said they've always had there's in their career, there's at least one person who they've interviewed who's been very closed off. And I feel like if you can get that one little like conversation going, it becomes easier. But have you ever like dealt with a guest that's been really closed off, and how did you end up handling it during the interview?
You know, you just do your best. You know, you keep you know, you keep asking questions and you try to be receptive. And you know, and one of the tricks that we learn, it's not a trick, but one of the things we do is to just stop talking, you know, because silence can be our friend. You know, if I ask you a question, how are you feeling? And somebody goes, good. I have all the time in the world. It's like, I don't have to break the uncomfortable silence.
I feel like that sounds like a really good parenting tactic.
Maybe it is. I don't know. I would never try that with my kids. But you'd be surprised if you ever want to know what somebody's really thinking. You know, if there's someone you want to know, like, let that silence hang. You know, I think that there's a line in what is it, Pulp Fiction, where Uma Thurman goes, "Don't you just hate that? Uncomfortable silences?" But uncomfortable silences are our friends sometimes. And not just because my college thesis advisor lived next door to Uma Thurman, and I used to be over at the house when she was like 9 years old or whatever. Sometimes you just sort of, you know, sometimes you just let it be quiet and let somebody else fill the silence. That can work sometimes. Try it in your own.
That's definitely true. Oh, sorry. I think that's definitely true, and I think we're all going to remember that, because we've got some like interviews that we're really excited for, but I think we're always worried that we'll come across one that's just really standoffish or doesn't really answer the questions and just gives one word answers. So I think we're definitely going to remember that tip of just uncomfortable silence. Just work through it.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't always work, but you know, if you know, and then just as like a rule of thumb, you know, often it's better if your question begins with the word what. Because sometimes what you want to avoid is a yes or no question. You know, because sometimes people just go yes or no, and then where are you? You know, but if you go what, that's not going to end in a yes or no. You know, what do you remember from making that movie? What happened next? What did you do then? It's like people can tell you those stories. That's what I find anyway. Your own mileage may vary, as we say.
I guess, I mean, speaking of, you know, what kind of questions, the next one now is like hoping to ask you is, you've touched on this a little bit with giving us advice, but what advice can you give for conducting interviews?
My best advice is to really know your subject before your subject sits down. You know, I think try to read everything you can in which that subject has been interviewed before, and look at the good stories that person tells, or the things that person likes to talk about, and kind of know what, you know, kind of know you can go to those when you need to. It's like, you know, you can also find out what that person may not want to talk about, you know, but like going back and looking at earlier interviews or things that have been written about somebody or things they've talked about, that can give you a good roadmap in terms of stories you can go back and listen to. Or maybe you're curious about something that they mentioned before that you want to know more about. That's always helpful. I think knowing about a subject shows respect for the person you're talking to, and that people tend to respond to that. Because I think a lot of times people are interviewed by people who don't know anything about them. And while they're polite and happy to help, I think they respond more when they feel like, well, somebody's seen my movies, or somebody's seen my TV shows, or somebody knows my work, or maybe just somebody knows what my hometown is, or where I went to school, or something like that, or what the nickname of my school team was, or anything like that. Some little detail that can tell somebody, oh, I see you've taken an interest. Well, in exchange, I'll take an interest in you and tell you this story.
That's really good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's incredible. And I guess kind of more on that kind of vibe, speaking about some of your previous work, and we've spoken briefly about Scooby-Doo in this interview. So of course, an interview that you'd conducted that I would personally have like the heebie-jeebies about, I'd be very nervous, would be speaking to Sarah Michelle Gellar. What do you remember from that interview?
Do you remember where it was? I can sort of think of two times. I have this vague memory of doing her like on a set somewhere, and then I think I also did her in Vale, like with a whole bunch of other people from.
Was it the bedroom from Cruel Intentions?
It was
Cruel
in
Intentions.
1998 for the
that's right.
Cruel Intentions.
Oh, that's right. I was on the set of Cruel Intentions. I remember that. I was on the set for kind of a racy little day. I remember that was a racy little day. That was her and Reese Witherspoon, who we didn't know was about to become a huge star. And, and Ryan Philippe. Oh, yeah, I remember. Oh, sure, yeah. So, well, she was a New Yorker, like I was, right? She was from New York, so I knew we had that in common. And she was really on her way, she was going to succeed. I have a better memory. I feel like I have a better memory of her from Scream 2, I think I did her for. Am I remembering right that she was in both Scream 2 and I Know What You Did Last Summer?
Yeah.
I feel like she was in both of those, because I think I think I teased her a little bit about that. I said, like, you want to be the girl with the most cake, which is the line from Courtney Love's band Hole, Doll Parts. And she was on the rise then. So, but she was always like bright and sharp, like the kids I knew growing up in New York. Sometimes growing up in the city is its own lesson, and she had known success right from the very beginning. And she was like a real working actor. She'd taken it seriously right from the beginning. It wasn't like one of these crazy things that sort of fell into her lap. And so I'm hardly an expert on her, but she really knew her stuff and had been used to being on sets from an early age. And I think some of the success, and it appears the life that she's lived ever since, is a tribute to like how steady her path has been.
Yeah, I mean, I know she was saying in one interview that we saw that you'd done, and also she said it when she's been on the set for Scooby-Doo, which was I think 4 years later from the Cruel Intentions interview. Like her routines when she's filming more than one thing, she'll go without a day off for a few months at a time. Like she was saying when she was on the set of Scooby-Doo, the live action first movie was set in Australia, and she was also filming Buffy in America. So she was flying from Australia to America every 3 days to switch filming locations, to switch movies, and kind of been on the plane was her getting her lines ready for the next thing that she was doing. So I think just the work ethic that comes across in a lot of the interviews she's done is incredible.
I went to Australia once to interview Tom Cruise when he was down there, and like with the time change and stuff, like for the first 3 days, I was just like, hi Tom. I really did not know what I was doing. I mean, the one thing I remember about him from that interview is we were having lunch next to the water, and I don't actually know what this is called, but it was like somebody was up, like somebody's being pulled by a boat and was up in the air with like a sail behind them, and Tom Cruise says, hey, what do they call that? And I go, I think it's parasailing. I mean, it looked really dramatic to me. And Tom looked at it and goes, that just looks boring to me. And I laughed. And now 20 years later, having seen the things that he does in those Mission Impossible movies, hanging onto the side of a plane while it's taking off, I think to myself, that probably was boring to him.
Oh my gosh. And I mean, when you've been doing these interviews like we saw with the Cruel Intentions one, you get to go to so many of the film sets and everything. Is there one film set that you remember kind of been stood on just thinking, okay, wow, this is amazing? Because I know a lot of movies now, a lot of things are done in front of a green screen, whereas for movies like Harry Potter, JayBee and I went to the Harry Potter studios. They've preserved so many of the old sets. There's a castle replica of Hogwarts that's the size of like an entire house. if not bigger. Like, you know, some movies do get that extra kind of feel. Do you remember like seeing a film set that was just like,
Yeah,
oh
like
my-
why would you ever want to leave, right? That kind of thing. I remember being, I think I was on the set of Scream 2. I think right here in Pasadena, you know, they were just out there, and you just saw all these young actors having the best time and knowing how special they were. On the TV side, I remember going on to the set of Mad Men, just when that was really like a very successful show. And it was just amazing because it, you know, it's like you say, it was a perfectly realized world. Like every detail of it was perfect for the year and stuff. And you see it on TV and you go, you know, "Oh, it must be kind of fake." But no, you looked at it and every detail was taken care of so that like it was a real office, and they really had that kind of stuff. So yeah, just being on those sets really like does a thing to your mind, doesn't it? It's like, wow, that's for real. And you don't always, sometimes it really feels like you're on a movie set. You know, the difference between reality and movie is different. Sometimes you can just let your imagination kind of take you away and go, wow, maybe I'll just hang out here for a while. You know, when we did the interviews for Solo, they had a Millennium Falcon ready to go for all of us to sit next to Chewie and to fly. And so we all had our picture taken, like in the pilot seat with Chewie next to us, you know, like, you know, and he's gesturing and telling us what a bad job we're doing flying the plane. And so that felt, you know, that felt like kind of the real thing.
That's amazing. Oh, is that the internet again?
Oh no,
Sorry, we thought our internet kind of disconnected again then.
It's been known to happen, as we know.
So I guess, sorry.
Sorry. No,
Rihanna.
you go first.
I was just gonna say, so like we've been talking, and I guess I'm kind of maybe skipping ahead a little bit here as to some of the kind of points that we'd written down, but you've talked about so many places like Australia, Hawaii. Is like your work's taken you like everywhere. Is there one place that stands out to you as somewhere that you've really enjoyed being the most?
Well, we've had some amazing experiences doing some of the stories that we've done. You know, it's always great to go to England and all the history that's there. Rihanna, thank you for getting us there. We really enjoyed it. It was a pretty special experience to meet you and your wonderful family, and to see how you lived and how your community was like. And that's really the special thing, is to get to meet the people we get to meet when we go places, and that they're so generous to us in terms of sharing their homes, opening up their homes. We get to, you know, we walk into those places with great respect, and we feel very honored to get to be there and to talk to people and stuff. And so from South Africa to South America to, you know, to Australia, we're lucky to have the opportunity to go. But as great as the places are, it's the people you get to meet, you know, that really stay in your mind, and to get to hear their stories is the real blessing.
That's awesome. And you know, speaking about places, as you know, 3 out of 4 of us are UK hosts, we have to ask, what did you like most about visiting England?
I've always loved England. We always have such a great time in England. You know, I associate England with like all the great music that's come out of England first. Like when I used to come to London, the first thing I would do would be to go to a record store and buy a lot of records and all the things you couldn't get back in the States. And I'd be so cool, and I'd come back with all my albums. And it's like, no, you can't have it. It's mine, that kind of thing, you know? And then, so that would always be a lot of fun. And then I always loved seeing all the plays there. I would spend a lot of time in the West End, you know, and get to see people on stage, you know, at the National Theater or just in the West End, like doing these cool plays. You know, I'd see plays that were done in a very experimental way that you could only see in England. That was a lot of fun. You know, and then we would go to the pubs and watch soccer, you know, football games, as you guys would call them. And that would be great to see how passionate people would be. You know, I think there was like a Champions League final that was on in England just a few days after we spent time with you, Rihanna. And people were pretty passionate. I think it was Liverpool versus somebody else.
Yeah.
I was rooting for the somebody else, and in that sense, I mean anybody else, because I'm kind of an Arsenal guy. But that was a lot of fun, you know. So no, England is always a place we always look forward to going. It's a great sports culture. It's a great music culture. It's a great acting culture, you know. And people are so interesting and tell the best stories that, you know, particularly with the pandemic, you know, maybe starting to recede a little bit, getting to do all those things that you do with groups there would be special. But the first time I went there was in '79, way back in the day. And I remember going to play in Stratford, a Shakespeare play, and seeing a guy who I'd never heard of be really, really funny. And I'd never heard of him before. And I came back and they said, "What did you see that you liked?" I said, "I saw this guy in this play. He was really, really funny." They go, "What's his name?" So you want, they go, "What's his name?" I said, "His name is Ben Kingsley, and he might be really good." And that was before he won the Oscar and before he became Sir Ben Kingsley. And so I got credit for being early on Ben Kingsley.
Again, it's that good luck charm.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. It's really me that made the difference. Thanks for bringing that up. It's me. Like, I had my little wand that I've struck all of you with. And so, again, you'll be dames and sirs before you all know it. So.
So we're wondering, are there any upcoming movies that you would really like to interview the stars of?
You know, I hope I get to talk to Tom again for Top Gun Maverick. I think that'll be kind of amusing. I'm interested to see what the Doctor Strange thing turns out to be. You know, they're always setting the bar higher and higher and higher. It looks like I'm going to talk to some of the visual effects people who are nominated this year's Oscars. And I want to hear sort of about how they did what they did to make Spider-Man or Free Guy or some of those movies that are nominated look so special. I think we love visual effects. We don't always think to ourselves, wow, those guys really kind of, those women and men really make those movies different, you know? I'm interviewing Penelope Cruz in a week and a half. She's nominated for Best Actress Oscar for her work in the Pedro Almodovar movie Parallel Mothers. That's a wonderful performance, and I'll look forward to talking to her about that. And then I'm talking to a gentleman in a couple of days for ESPN who has formed a football league, an American football league, just for people who use wheelchairs. He's been very involved in doing it for the last 20 years or so, and he's gotten the big, you know, American football, you know, group over here, the NFL, to help partner with him, and it's been really a cause for him, and it's a lot of fun for him and a lot of fun for his friends, and so I want to talk to him about how that path worked for him and how gratified he is that it's had such success. So I guess I got a lot of things, and I want to see the next episode of Abbott Elementary. Has anybody watched Abbott Elementary yet? That's this big new TV show in New York that they're in America everybody's talking about. So I'm looking forward to that as well.
I'm presuming that means
I talk about WandaVision a lot. That's the other thing I always talk about. I talk about WandaVision a lot. You know, because did you guys all watch WandaVision?
Yeah.
oh, we loved it. Yeah,
It was
it
amazing.
was
that
like
movie
a weekly
yeah.
release on Disney Plus, and
Yeah. So that movie kind of fascinates me just because I feel like 5 years ago it would have been it would have been a movie. It would have been like a feature film, and it's a TV show. But it had all the ambition of a movie, right? It had like really interesting stuff. It was a movie. And I feel like if it was a movie, we'd be talking about it now, like with the Oscars, the same way we're talking about these other movies. People talk about why isn't Spider-Man nominated? And Spider-Man was a popular movie. I'm not saying it wasn't a really enjoyable movie, but WandaVision was really well done and had something to say. You know, it had like deep feelings to it and regret. And it had what I thought the most memorable line of dialogue of 2021 was, which was, you know, what is grief but love persevering?
Yeah.
Anybody who writes a sentence, you know, heard that line and went, okay, all right, that might be the best line I hear in a movie all year. And so as well done as it was as a TV show, I kind of wish it had been a movie so that we could be thinking about it for the Oscars right now. But it's a real object lesson in how stories are being told now. That stories that used to be feature films are now TV shows, and things are being done in different forms than they used to be. And so I have to get used to that. The movies has to get used to that.
I guess the awards do too. It kind of opens up new potential of ways to acknowledge the incredible work that is happening on things like Disney Plus with all the new Marvel shows and everything.
There's so much of it. I think the problem is it's hard to keep track of it all. You know, I think like if you're completist, son, do you feel like you've seen every bit of content that's been done on Marvel? Is there things you haven't seen yet? I think it's hard to keep up with everything now.
It is. I think JayBee, you've
The only
seen
one
everything.
I haven't seen is Eternals, because I was waiting for that to come on Disney Plus, and then I just kind of never got round to it. That's the only one that I haven't seen. Everything else I'd say that I've watched.
Okay. I haven't seen Hawkeye, so I'm behind there, although it sounds like something I'd enjoy. But it's just a lot of there's just a lot of content now, you know, and you can get exhausted trying to catch up with it. You know, it can be a full-time job. On the other hand, it probably should be my full-time job. You know, I've seen just about all the Oscar-nominated movies, but I still have a couple I haven't yet, so I need those. But I've got a pretty good scorecard there. It's just interesting to see how the kind of storytelling that we associate with movies can now be found in television as well, you know, in that TV form, from WandaVision to, I don't know, Succession to lots of other things, you know, Queen's Gambit, whatever you might have enjoyed, Hawkeye or something like that, The Mandalorian or Boba Fett, you know, again, those are really interesting takes on the Star Wars universe. I'm told some people enjoy the Star Wars universe. Is that right? Yeah. So it's fun to see that get another go around and stuff, or see Jon Favreau's take on that. So yeah, it's fascinating to see the different ways this stuff comes to the marketplace.
Absolutely, and just the amount of people that there are involved in this, like I think especially for WandaVision, like you say, it could have been nominated for writing, acting, and I also love the score in that show as well. But is there anyone that you've always wanted to interview that you haven't had the opportunity to yet?
That's interesting. You know, when people say who you're looking forward to talking to next, sometimes the right answer is to say the next one. You know, you're just ready for the next one, because every new person kind of presents a challenge. I've been pretty lucky in terms of covering the waterfront. I've had just about everybody sitting across from me, and so you know, I'm interested to see who the Oscar season presents. I really enjoyed The Lost Daughter, you know, which was adapted and directed by Maggie Gyllenhaal, whose work you probably know as an actor, you know, from some of the things that she's done. I'd like to talk to her about that, because I thought that was a really strong piece of work, and I thought she made some interesting decisions with regard to it. That's kind of what motivates me. If I've seen something that I like, that I'd like to talk to somebody about. But you know, I'll await who stands in front of me, and will be prepared to speak to them, you know, when called upon.
So it does sound like you've got some incredible things coming your way, and we absolutely cannot wait to keep up with everything and to watch what you've got coming up. But is there a place that people watching this interview where they can keep up with what you're doing?
I feel like some of you folks may have a better idea where my stuff lives than I do.
Yeah.
You know, I don't always know. You know, it does air in specific times on American television. I think you can usually find it on the internet. You know, frequently my name is misspelled, so that always makes it more challenging. But you know, but most of my work is done for Good Morning America or for Nightline here in or 2020 here in America, or for ESPN, which, you know, is also on. So if you just sort of search those and see what comes up, odds are service or, you know, somewhere on the internet, my stuff will emerge. We're in a period now where you just don't know what platform some of your work is going to do. I figure my job is to do the work and let other people decide what platform it will live on.
That's a really, really good approach. And again, we would like to thank you for your time today. We understand you've been really generous with time, but I think it's just because we've had a lot to ask you about, a lot that we were interested in, and so much to talk about. Like, oh my goodness, the movie conversations have been my absolute favorite from this. So I guess that's certainly it, I think, for what we have to say, unless anybody's got anything else they'd like to add.
Well, I'm very good. Again, like Milly was saying, thank you so much for your time today. It's been absolutely amazing to speak to you.
Well, I'm very grateful for the invitation, and your questions as an interviewer are all really interesting and fun to answer. And thanks for listening to my answers. And if you want to do this again sometime, let's do that. In the meantime, let's all enjoy the movies, okay?
Indeed,
Yeah,
that'll be
sounds like
amazing.
such a good plan. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank
Have
you.
a good
And
evening.
thank you also to anybody who was listening to this video. The links to anything we mentioned will be in the description below, and subscribe to the channel for more interviews.